The heavy cream-colored envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, bearing the official seal of the Governor of California. As I slid my finger under the elegant flap, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Here I was, Jessica Martinez, holding an invitation to dine at the governor's mansion as part of an exclusive policy advisory committee, while my phone buzzed with increasingly desperate messages from my mother asking if I could, quote, finally contribute something meaningful to this year's Easter dinner conversation. The formal invitation, printed on thick cardstock with gold embossing, requested my presence at a private dinner to discuss environmental policy initiatives with Governor Richardson and select cabinet members. My expertise in sustainable energy legislation had caught the attention of the state's highest office, and they wanted my input on shaping California's future. I set the invitation carefully on my granite kitchen counter in my Palo Alto home, the morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows illuminating the state's seal. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my mother, Patricia, reminding me that this Sunday's Easter gathering would be at Grandmother Helen's house, and that I should try to dress appropriately for once, and maybe have some positive news to share instead of all that political nonsense. The contrast between that message and the prestigious invitation sitting before me would have been laughable if it weren't so painfully familiar. But before I tell you exactly what happened when I walked into that Easter dinner with this invitation in my purse, and how 25 years of being called the family disappointment led to this moment of ultimate vindication, I need you to know something. Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Riverside, California, in a modest 4-bedroom house with a perpetually brown lawn and a driveway that always seemed to have someone's car broken down in it, I learned early that success in the Martinez family had very specific parameters. The house itself, a 1970s tract home with beige stucco walls and a red tile roof, sat in a neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business, and maintaining appearances mattered more than anyone cared to admit. My parents, Patricia and David Martinez, had built what they considered a solid middle-class life through careful planning and conservative choices. My father worked as a supervisor at the local water treatment facility, a steady government job with excellent benefits that he'd held for over 20 years. My mother managed the office at a medical clinic, handling insurance claims and scheduling with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that made her invaluable to the practice. Together, they embodied the values they tried to instill in their 3 children: stability, practicality, and above all, financial security. In our family hierarchy, my older sister Amanda reigned as the undisputed golden child. 5 years my senior, she had followed the prescribed path to perfection, earning a business degree from USC before landing a position at a prestigious accounting firm in Los Angeles. Amanda drove a late-model BMW, lived in a luxury apartment in Manhattan Beach, and sent my parents expensive gifts on every holiday. Her success was the standard against which all other achievements were measured, and she wore that responsibility with the confidence of someone who had never questioned whether the path chosen for her was the right one. My younger brother Kevin occupied the enviable position of family charmer. 8 years younger than me, he possessed an easy smile and natural charisma that allowed him to navigate family dynamics without ever facing serious scrutiny. Kevin could show up to family gatherings empty-handed and late, spin some story about his latest adventure or romantic conquest, and leave with everyone convinced he was destined for greatness. His ability to deflect criticism with humor and charm was a gift I envied throughout my childhood. Then there was me, Jessica, sandwiched between the achiever and the charmer, struggling to find my place in a family that valued conformity above all else. From an early age, I showed an intense curiosity about how things worked, not just mechanically, but socially and politically. While Amanda played house with her dolls and Kevin entertained everyone with his performances, I could be found reading news magazines I'd stolen from my father's pile, or watching C-SPAN when no one was paying attention. Our extended family gatherings took place every major holiday at my paternal grandmother's ranch-style house across town. Grandmother Helen Rodriguez had immigrated from Mexico in the 1950s and built her version of the American dream through decades of hard work and sacrifice. Her house, with its carefully maintained rose garden and immaculate interior, served as the family headquarters where success was celebrated and failure was quietly noted for future reference. These gatherings followed a predictable pattern. The adults would cluster in the formal living room, where my father's sister Carol and her husband Stephen would hold court with stories of their daughter's latest accomplishments. Carol worked as a real estate agent and never missed an opportunity to mention her latest sales figures or the exclusive properties she'd recently shown. Stephen managed a chain of auto parts stores and possessed the kind of confidence that came from never having his opinions challenged within the family circle. Their twin daughters, Brittany and Samantha, were exactly my age but seemed to exist in a different universe entirely. Both had chosen safe, traditional paths that earned immediate family approval. Brittany had become a dental hygienist and married her high school boyfriend, while Samantha worked as a teacher and spent her free time planning elaborate Pinterest-worthy events for her children. They represented everything my family believed young women should aspire to: stable careers, early marriages, and an unwavering commitment to conventional choices. The first signs that I didn't quite fit the Martinez family mold emerged when I was around 10 years old. That summer, while my cousins spent their days at the community pool perfecting their tans and gossiping about boys, I had discovered the public library's collection of biographies about political figures. I became fascinated by stories of people who had changed the world through public service, spending hours reading about civil rights leaders, senators, and governors who had used their positions to make a difference. I remember one particular Sunday dinner at Grandmother Helen's when the conversation turned to current events. A controversial city council election was making headlines in Riverside, and I eagerly joined the discussion with opinions I'd formed after reading multiple newspaper articles about the candidates' platforms. The table fell silent as I explained my analysis of the local housing crisis and suggested policy solutions I'd read about in other cities. Aunt Carol was the first to break the uncomfortable quiet. "Well, aren't you the little politician?" she said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Jessica always has such interesting ideas about things that don't really concern her. The dismissal stung, but what hurt more was watching my parents exchange glances that seemed to say they agreed with Carol's assessment. That dinner established a pattern that would follow me throughout my adolescence. My interests in government, policy, and social issues were treated as amusing quirks at best and concerning obsessions at worst. When other kids my age were focused on sports, music, or typical teenage concerns, I was reading political memoirs and following legislative sessions online. My family viewed this behavior with a mixture of confusion and gentle discouragement, as if my passionate interest in civic engagement was a phase one would eventually outgrow. The subtle pressure to conform intensified as I approached high school graduation. Amanda's success in business had set a clear expectation for lucrative career paths, and my parents began steering conversations toward practical majors that would guarantee stable employment. They spoke admiringly of careers in healthcare, business administration, and education, fields that offered clear advancement paths and predictable income levels. During my junior year, I announced my intention to study political science in college, hoping to eventually work in government or public policy. The response was immediate and discouraging. My mother worried aloud about the financial instability of political careers, while my father questioned whether such work was really helping people in the way that traditional service professions did. Grandmother Helen shook her head sadly and reminded everyone that she had worked too hard to build security for her family to watch her granddaughter throw it away on impractical dreams. The pressure reached its peak during my senior year when I was accepted to UC Berkeley's political science program. My parents had hoped I would choose a closer school where I could live at home and save money, preferably studying something more practical, like business or nursing. When I insisted on Berkeley, they reluctantly agreed to help with costs, but made it clear they viewed my choice as selfish and potentially ruinous. At my high school graduation party, held in Grandmother Helen's backyard under string lights and paper lanterns, I announced my plans to study political science and eventually work in government. The reaction was polite but distinctly lukewarm. While Amanda's business achievements and Kevin's charming personality were frequent topics of proud family conversation, my academic accomplishments and political interests were met with nervous smiles and quick subject changes. I remember Aunt Carol cornering me by the dessert table, her voice low but pointed as she questioned my choices. "Jessica, honey, you're such a smart girl," she said, emphasizing the word smart as if it were somehow problematic. But politics is such an unstable field. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Look at your sister Amanda. She has security, respect, a real career. Don't you want those things for yourself? When I tried to explain that I found political work meaningful and important, she smiled indulgently and patted my arm. "That's sweet, dear, but idealism doesn't pay the bills. You'll understand when you're older." What my family didn't understand was that my passion for political work came from a deep belief that government could be a force for positive change in people's lives. I had seen how policy decisions affected real families like ours, from my father's job security at the municipal water facility to the quality of schools in our neighborhood. I wanted to be part of creating solutions to the problems I saw around me, but explaining this motivation to relatives who viewed politics as either boring or corrupt felt impossible. The disconnect between my dreams and my family's expectations created a persistent undercurrent of tension at family gatherings. While my cousins' conventional choices were celebrated and supported, my path was treated as a concerning detour that would hopefully be corrected with time and maturity. I began to dread family events, knowing that my interests and achievements would be politely dismissed, while everyone else's more traditional successes were enthusiastically praised. As I prepared to leave for Berkeley that fall, I felt both excited about the opportunities ahead and hurt by my family's lack of support for my chosen path. They weren't cruel or openly hostile, but their constant subtle discouragement and barely concealed disapproval made it clear that I was disappointing them by choosing passion over practicality. I left for college determined to prove that meaningful work in public service could also lead to success, even if my family couldn't see its value. The drive up to Berkeley in my aging Honda Civic, packed with everything I owned, felt like both an escape and an exile. My parents had given me their blessing but not their enthusiasm, and I knew I was entering this new chapter of my life without the foundation of family support that Amanda and Kevin took for granted. What I didn't realize then was that this lack of traditional support would force me to develop the independence and resilience that would eventually lead me to achievements beyond anything my family had imagined possible. UC Berkeley opened my eyes to a world where political engagement was not only accepted but celebrated. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who shared my passion for policy, governance, and social change. My professors encouraged the kind of analytical thinking and civic involvement that my family had always found puzzling, and my classmates challenged me to think more deeply about the issues I cared about. During my freshman year, I threw myself into campus political organizations and volunteer work with local campaigns. While Amanda was climbing the corporate ladder at her accounting firm, and Kevin was charming his way through community college, I was learning about legislative processes, campaign strategy, and the intricate ways that policy decisions affected communities. My grades reflected my engagement with the material, and I quickly caught the attention of professors who saw potential in my combination of analytical skills and genuine passion for public service. The contrast between my college experience and my family's perception of it became starkly apparent during holiday visits home. When I excitedly shared stories about internships with local representatives or research projects on environmental policy, my family listened with polite disinterest, before quickly changing the subject to Amanda's latest promotion or Kevin's new girlfriend. My achievements in academic competitions and leadership positions within political organizations were acknowledged briefly and then forgotten, while my siblings' more conventional milestones were discussed and celebrated repeatedly. By my sophomore year, I had secured a prestigious internship with a state assemblyman's office in Sacramento. The work was demanding but exhilarating, involving research on education funding, constituent services, and policy analysis that would inform actual legislation. For the first time, I felt like I was doing work that mattered, contributing to decisions that would affect thousands of people across California. When I called home with news of the internship, my mother's first question was whether it paid enough to cover my expenses. When I explained that it was an unpaid position but provided invaluable experience, she sighed audibly and wondered aloud when I would start thinking practically about my future. My father asked if there were any full-time jobs available at the assemblyman's office, missing the point that I was still a student gaining experience in my chosen field. The family's lack of understanding deepened during my junior year when I began working on my senior thesis about sustainable energy policy in California. The research was complex and time-consuming, requiring interviews with government officials, analysis of economic data, and recommendations for legislative action. My advisor praised the work as graduate-level research and encouraged me to present it at academic conferences. When I tried to explain the significance of this project to my family, their eyes glazed over with the same polite disinterest I had grown accustomed to. Grandmother Helen asked why I was spending so much time on schoolwork instead of focusing on finding a husband like my cousins were doing. Aunt Carol suggested that all this political involvement was making me too serious, and that I should consider more social activities that would help me meet, quote, the right kind of people. The criticism reached a crescendo during my senior year when I announced my acceptance to a graduate program in public policy at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. I had been awarded a research assistantship that would cover my tuition and provide a modest living stipend, an achievement that my professors called exceptional for someone my age. Instead of celebration, my announcement was met with concern and barely concealed disapproval. My parents worried about the cost of living in Washington and questioned whether more school was really necessary when I could be starting a real career with my bachelor's degree. Amanda suggested that I was avoiding the job market by hiding in academia, while Kevin joked that I was becoming too smart for my own good. Even Grandmother Helen, who had always valued education, wondered if I was making things too complicated for myself when simpler paths were available. The final straw came at Easter dinner during my senior year, just weeks before my graduation from Berkeley. The family had gathered at Grandmother Helen's house as always, with the dining room table set with her best china, and the conversation flowing around familiar topics of work, relationships, and family news. Amanda had recently been promoted to senior accountant and was regaling everyone with stories about her new corner office and increased salary. Kevin had just started dating a nurse, which earned approving nods from the family who saw healthcare as a respectable career choice. When the conversation turned to me, I shared news about my upcoming graduation with highest honors and my acceptance to Georgetown. Instead of pride, I was met with concerned looks and gentle but persistent questioning about my choices. Why did I need more school when I could start working immediately? Wasn't I worried about accumulating more debt? Didn't I want to settle down and start a family like my cousins were doing? The questions felt like an intervention, as if my family had collectively decided that I needed to be saved from my own poor judgment. When I tried to explain that graduate school would prepare me for meaningful work in policy development and government administration, Aunt Carol interrupted with a laugh. "Oh, Jessica, you and your politics. When are you going to grow out of this phase and do something practical with your life?" The word phase hit me like a physical blow. After 4 years of academic excellence, meaningful internships, and clear direction toward a career in public service, my family still viewed my passion as a temporary deviation from more sensible choices. In that moment, sitting at Grandmother Helen's perfectly set Easter table surrounded by relatives who couldn't see the value in the work I wanted to do, I realized that no amount of achievement would ever be enough to earn their respect, as long as I remained committed to a path they didn't understand. The conversation that followed would forever change my relationship with my family, setting in motion a series of events that would lead me from that dismissive Easter dinner to an invitation to dine with the Governor of California, proving that sometimes the black sheep of the family becomes the one who changes the world. That Easter dinner at Grandmother Helen's house remains burned into my memory with painful clarity. The afternoon California sun streamed through her lace curtains, casting delicate shadows across the formal dining room where our family had gathered for decades to mark important occasions. The table was set with her cherished Royal Albert china, the pattern of pink roses and gold trim that she had saved for decades to purchase piece by piece. Crystal glasses caught the light, and the smell of her famous honey-glazed ham filled the air with the comfort of tradition. I had driven down from Berkeley that morning, my Honda Civic loaded with laundry and textbooks, still riding high on the news of my Georgetown acceptance. The research assistantship letter was tucked carefully in my purse, along with a printed copy of my senior thesis that had earned praise from professors and recommendations for publication. I thought perhaps this time, with such concrete evidence of my academic achievements, my family might finally understand that my path was leading somewhere meaningful. Amanda had arrived earlier in her pristine BMW, dressed in a tailored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. She regaled everyone with stories about her recent promotion to senior accountant, describing her new corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Los Angeles. The family hung on every word as she detailed her increased salary, her expanding client portfolio, and the partnership track that lay ahead of her. Her success was tangible, measurable, and completely comprehensible to everyone at the table. Kevin bounded in fashionably late, as always, bearing a bouquet of grocery store flowers and his trademark grin that could diffuse any criticism. He spun tales about his latest adventures at community college, his new job at a local electronics store, and his budding romance with Sarah, a nursing student he had met at a coffee shop. The family cooed over his stories, charmed by his easy charisma, and the conventionally appealing trajectory of dating someone in healthcare. When conversation turned to me, I carefully explained my acceptance to Georgetown's prestigious public policy program, emphasizing the competitive nature of the research assistantship and the opportunities it would provide for working on real policy issues affecting millions of Americans. I spoke about my senior thesis on renewable energy legislation, trying to convey the excitement I felt about contributing to solutions for climate change and economic development. The response was immediate and deflating. My mother's brow furrowed with worry as she calculated the cost of living in Washington, D.C. Despite my explanation that the assistantship covered tuition and provided a stipend, my father questioned whether more education was really necessary when I could start earning money immediately with my Berkeley degree. Grandmother Helen, her silver hair perfectly styled despite her 82 years, shook her head with the disapproving expression I knew meant she thought I was making a mistake. Aunt Carol, never one to let an opportunity for criticism pass, leaned forward with her practiced smile that never quite masked her judgment. "Jessica, sweetheart, you're such a bright girl, but don't you think it's time to be more realistic about your future? Amanda has built such a wonderful career in business, and look how well she's doing. Kevin is dating a nurse, which is such a stable profession. But this political thing you're so focused on, well, it's just not practical for a young woman who should be thinking about security and family." The words stung, but what hurt more was the nodding heads around the table. Even my parents, who had supported my education if not my chosen field, seemed to agree with Carol's assessment. The achievement that had felt so significant that morning suddenly seemed diminished, reduced to an impractical indulgence by people who couldn't see beyond their narrow definition of success. I tried once more to explain the importance of policy work, describing how legislative decisions affected everything from the quality of our drinking water to the funding for schools like the ones Kevin attended. I talked about the satisfaction of researching solutions to real problems and the honor of potentially serving the public good. But my words seemed to bounce off a wall of skeptical faces that had already decided my passion was misguided. The conversation took an even more painful turn when Cousin Brittany announced her engagement to her longtime boyfriend, a dental equipment salesman with a steady income and reliable prospects. The table erupted in excitement and congratulations, with Grandmother Helen immediately beginning to plan an engagement party and Aunt Carol gushing about wedding venues and guest lists. The contrast between the celebration of Brittany's conventional milestone and the tepid response to my academic achievement couldn't have been more stark. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself increasingly isolated at the table where I had once felt completely at home. Conversations swirled around topics that seemed designed to emphasize how different my choices were from what the family valued. Amanda discussed her latest luxury purchases and vacation plans to Hawaii. Kevin entertained everyone with stories about his coworkers and their weekend adventures. Even quiet cousin Samantha joined in, sharing updates about her teaching position and her plans to start a family soon. When I attempted to contribute stories about my internship experiences or my research findings, the responses were polite but dismissive. My family listened with the same patient tolerance they might show a child describing an imaginary friend. They weren't cruel, but their message was clear. My interests were not worthy of the same respect and enthusiasm they showed for everyone else's more conventional pursuits. The breaking point came when grandmother Helen, her voice carrying the authority of the family matriarch, looked directly at me and said, "Mija, I love you dearly, but I worry about this path you're choosing. Your grandfather and I worked so hard to give our children opportunities, to build something stable and secure. Why would you want to throw that away on uncertain dreams? Politics is dirty business, and it's no place for a good girl like you. You're too smart to waste your talents on something so unpredictable." Her words, delivered with genuine concern but devastating impact, crystallized everything I had been feeling about my place in the family. Despite my academic achievements, my clear sense of purpose, and my acceptance to one of the nation's top graduate programs, I was still seen as the granddaughter making poor choices, the family member who needed to be guided back to safer ground. I looked around the table at faces I had loved since childhood, searching for even one expression of support or understanding. What I found instead was a unanimous consensus that my dreams were problematic, my achievements insufficient, and my future path requiring intervention. In that moment, surrounded by family but feeling completely alone, I made a decision that would alter the trajectory of my life forever. Standing up from the table with as much dignity as I could muster, I thanked Grandmother Helen for dinner and announced that I needed to return to Berkeley to prepare for finals. The protests were immediate but half-hearted, with everyone seeming to understand that the conversation had reached an uncomfortable conclusion. As I gathered my things and said my goodbyes, I could feel the relief in the room that the difficult topic of my future had been tabled once again. The drive back to Berkeley felt like a journey between two different worlds. Behind me lay the suffocating certainty of family expectations, and the painful knowledge that my achievements would never be enough to earn their respect as long as I remained committed to public service. Ahead lay the uncertain but exhilarating prospect of graduate school, meaningful work, and the possibility of proving that idealism and practical success could coexist. That Easter dinner marked the beginning of my gradual but inevitable separation from a family that couldn't understand my dreams. It would be years before I fully grasped the significance of that moment. The way that rejection had freed me to pursue excellence without the burden of seeking approval from people who would never value what I valued. The pain was real and lasting, but it also provided the motivation I needed to succeed on my own terms, eventually leading to achievements that would force even my skeptical family to reconsider their assumptions about politics and public service. Moving to Washington, D.C. for graduate school felt like stepping into a different universe entirely. Georgetown University's campus, with its historic brick buildings and ivy-covered walls, represented everything I had dreamed about during those lonely evenings in Riverside, when I felt like the only person in my family who cared about government and policy. The city itself pulsed with political energy, from the imposing dome of the Capitol building to the bustling corridors of think tanks and advocacy organizations where real decisions were made daily. My first semester was a whirlwind of challenging coursework, networking events, and internship applications that promised to connect academic theory with practical experience. Unlike my undergraduate years, where I had often felt isolated by my interests, I was now surrounded by fellow students who shared my passion for public service and understood the importance of policy work. For the first time in my academic career, my enthusiasm for government was not just accepted but expected and encouraged. The contrast with my family's continued lack of support became even more pronounced during this period. While my classmates received care packages and encouraging phone calls from proud parents, my weekly conversations home consisted primarily of my mother's worried questions about my finances and my father's gentle suggestions that I consider more practical backup plans. When I excitedly shared news about being selected for competitive seminars or receiving recognition for my research work, the responses were polite but distant, as if I were describing events happening to someone else entirely. My research assistantship with Professor Maria Gonzalez opened doors I hadn't even known existed. Professor Gonzalez, a former advisor to 3 different governors and current consultant on environmental policy, saw potential in my analytical skills and passion for renewable energy issues. Under her mentorship, I began working on research that would eventually inform actual legislation, analyzing the economic impacts of solar energy incentives and wind farm development across different states. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying in ways that my family couldn't comprehend. I spent long hours in the library and computer labs, diving deep into economic data, interviewing industry experts, and crafting policy recommendations that could affect thousands of jobs and millions of dollars in investment. When Professor Gonzalez praised my work and suggested I present my findings at a national conference on sustainable energy policy, I felt a validation that was completely different from anything I had experienced in my family relationships. During winter break of my first year, I returned home to Riverside with a portfolio of academic achievements and professional experiences that would have impressed any observer familiar with the policy world. I had published my first peer-reviewed article, presented research at 2 conferences, and been invited to join an exclusive summer fellowship program in Sacramento working directly with state legislators on environmental issues. My professors spoke of my potential for influential career in government, and my classmates sought out my insights on complex policy questions. The family gathering that Christmas felt like visiting a foreign country where I no longer spoke the language fluently. Amanda dominated conversations with updates about her latest client acquisitions and her recent purchase of a condo in Santa Monica. Kevin charmed everyone with stories about his new management position at the electronics store and his deepening relationship with Sarah, who had started hinting about engagement rings. The family celebrated these milestones with genuine enthusiasm, asking detailed questions and offering advice and support. When conversation turned to my graduate school experiences, I found myself struggling to translate my achievements into terms my family could understand or appreciate. My publication in the Journal of Environmental Policy Analysis was met with polite congratulations, followed immediately by questions about whether it paid anything. My invitation to present at the National Conference on Renewable Energy Strategies was acknowledged briefly, before Aunt Carol wondered aloud when I would start focusing on finding a husband, instead of spending all my time buried in books and meetings. The disconnect felt more painful than outright hostility would have been. My family wasn't cruel or deliberately unsupportive, but they inhabited a world where success was measured in salary figures, job titles at recognizable companies, and conventional life milestones like marriage and homeownership. My achievements in academic publishing, policy research, and professional networking existed in a parallel universe that they couldn't access or appreciate. The situation reached a new low when I mentioned my summer fellowship opportunity in Sacramento, working with the state legislature on renewable energy legislation that could potentially create thousands of new jobs across California. Instead of excitement about my chance to contribute to meaningful policy work, my mother immediately worried about the temporary nature of the position and wondered when I would start looking for real, permanent employment. My father asked practical questions about housing and transportation that missed entirely the significance of being selected for such a competitive and prestigious opportunity. Grandmother Helen, now showing her age more noticeably but still sharp and opinionated, pulled me aside after dinner with the kind of serious conversation I had learned to dread. "Mija," she said, her weathered hands holding mine with gentle firmness, "I need to speak honestly with you about your choices. You're 24 years old now, and while I'm proud of your education, I'm worried about your future. Your cousin Brittany is planning her wedding, Samantha just bought a house with her husband, and even Kevin is talking about settling down. But you're still in school, still chasing these political dreams that may never lead anywhere stable. When will you start building a real life?" Her words, spoken with genuine love and concern, highlighted the fundamental disconnect between my aspirations and my family's expectations. To them, my graduate education was an expensive delay of real adulthood, my policy work was an abstract pursuit with no clear benefits, and my passion for public service was a phase one needed to outgrow before it was too late to make more practical choices. The conversation left me feeling misunderstood and increasingly isolated from people who had once been my closest support system. The summer fellowship in Sacramento proved to be a turning point in both my career and my relationship with my family. Working directly with state legislators and their staff on renewable energy policy gave me firsthand experience in how government actually functioned when it worked well. I spent my days analyzing proposed legislation, researching best practices from other states, and helping draft amendments that would improve the effectiveness of environmental incentives. The work environment was intellectually stimulating and professionally rewarding in ways that vindicated every choice I had made since declaring my major in political science. My colleagues were brilliant, dedicated public servants who had chosen government work because they believed in the possibility of creating positive change through effective policy. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who understood that meaningful work was its own reward, even when the financial compensation was modest compared to private sector alternatives. My supervisor, Deputy Director Catherine Liu, became an unexpected mentor who helped me understand the career paths available in state government. Catherine had started as a legislative aide after graduating from UC Berkeley with a degree in environmental science, working her way up through various departments before being appointed to her current position by the governor. Her career trajectory showed me that public service could indeed lead to positions of real influence and responsibility, contrary to my family's assumptions about political work being inherently unstable or unimportant. When I called home with updates about my fellowship experiences, the responses followed familiar patterns of polite disinterest punctuated by practical concerns. My excited descriptions of working on legislation that could affect California's energy future for decades were met with questions about whether the fellowship might lead to a permanent job offer. My pride in seeing policy recommendations I had researched implemented in actual bills was overshadowed by my mother's worries about my living arrangements and social isolation in Sacramento. The contrast between my professional validation and family dismissal created a cognitive dissonance that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. At work, I was treated as a valuable contributor whose insights helped shape important policy decisions. At family gatherings, I remained the concerning relative whose career choices required explanation and gentle correction. The two realities seemed impossible to reconcile, forcing me to choose between seeking family approval and pursuing professional fulfillment. As my second year of graduate school began, I made the unconscious decision to share less and less about my academic and professional achievements with my family. It was simply too painful to repeatedly translate meaningful accomplishments into defensive explanations of why my choices weren't as impractical as they appeared. Instead, our conversations focused on safer topics like the weather, neighborhood gossip, and general health updates that avoided the minefield of career discussions. This gradual withdrawal from family intimacy felt necessary for my emotional well-being, but it also marked the beginning of a growing distance that would eventually become a chasm. My family interpreted my reluctance to discuss my work as evidence that I was finally recognizing the limitations of my chosen path, while I saw it as protection from people who couldn't appreciate what I was trying to accomplish. Both sides settled into a polite but superficial relationship that avoided the conflicts that arose whenever my career ambitions became the focus of conversation. By the spring of my second year, I had secured a prestigious summer internship with a prominent environmental policy think tank in Washington, D.C., working on research that would inform federal legislation on clean energy infrastructure. The opportunity represented another significant step toward the kind of influential policy career I had always envisioned, but I found myself dreading the inevitable family conversations about my summer plans and what they meant for my long-term prospects. The think tank internship exceeded even my ambitious expectations, connecting me with policy experts, congressional staff, and advocacy organization leaders who were actively shaping the national conversation on environmental issues. My research on state-level renewable energy programs caught the attention of senior fellows who invited me to co-author reports that would be distributed to legislators and executive branch officials across the country. For the first time, I could see a clear path from my current work to positions of real influence in environmental policy at the federal level. Yet when I returned home for brief visits, these achievements felt almost impossible to communicate to family members who remained focused on more concrete markers of success. The gap between my professional reality and their understanding seemed to widen with each passing month, creating a relationship dynamic that felt increasingly unsustainable for everyone involved. The foundation was being laid for conflicts that would eventually force difficult choices about the role family would play in my life as I pursued my dreams of public service at the highest levels of government. The phone call from my mother came on a Tuesday evening in October, just as I was settling into my apartment, after a particularly intense day at the think tank. I had been working on a comprehensive report analyzing federal tax incentives for renewable energy development, collaborating with researchers from MIT and Stanford on data that would inform congressional hearings scheduled for the following month. The complexity of the work was exhilarating, requiring me to synthesize economic projections, technological assessments, and political feasibility studies into recommendations that could influence billions of dollars in federal investment. Patricia's voice carried the familiar tone of forced cheerfulness that I had learned to recognize as a prelude to difficult conversations. After the usual pleasantries about Washington weather and my apartment, she launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech about family expectations and my continuing education. "Jessica, your father and I have been talking, and we're concerned about how long you're staying in school. You'll be 25 when you graduate, and most girls your age are already established in their careers or starting families. We know you enjoy this political work, but isn't it time to think about more practical options?" The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with my mother cycling through familiar arguments about financial security, career stability, and social expectations that I had heard countless times before. She mentioned that Amanda had just received another promotion and was considering purchasing a house in an upscale Los Angeles suburb. Kevin had proposed to Sarah, and they were planning a spring wedding that would showcase everything the family valued about conventional success. The implicit comparison was clear. While my siblings were achieving recognizable milestones, I remained stuck in an extended adolescence of academic pursuits that seemed to lead nowhere productive. What made this conversation particularly painful was my mother's obvious discomfort with having to deliver what felt like an intervention. Patricia genuinely loved me and wanted what she believed was best for my future, but her definition of success was so fundamentally different from mine that we seemed to be speaking different languages. When I tried to explain the significance of my think tank work or the potential career opportunities it was creating, she listened with the patience of someone humoring a child's fantasy while waiting for reality to intrude. The breaking point came when she mentioned a conversation with our neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, whose daughter had recently graduated from nursing school and immediately secured a position at a prestigious hospital in San Diego. "She's making good money right away, Jessica, and she's helping people in a real, tangible way. I know you think your political work is important, but when will it actually start making a difference in people's lives? When will you be able to support yourself properly and think about settling down like your cousins are doing?" Her question revealed the fundamental disconnect that had been growing between us for years. To my mother, my research on renewable energy policy was abstract intellectual exercise with no visible impact on real people's lives. She couldn't see how legislation I helped draft might create thousands of jobs for families like ours, or how environmental policies could improve public health in communities across California. The work that felt most meaningful to me appeared completely disconnected from practical reality in her worldview. That conversation marked a turning point in my relationship with my family, though I didn't fully recognize it at the time. Over the following months, our phone calls became shorter and more superficial, focusing on safe topics that avoided the underlying tension about my career choices. I stopped sharing news about professional achievements or academic recognition, knowing that each accomplishment would only reinforce my family's perception that I was becoming increasingly removed from their values and expectations. The emotional distance that developed during this period was both protective and isolating. While avoiding family criticism allowed me to focus on my work without constant defending my choices, it also meant losing access to the support system that had sustained me throughout my childhood. I found myself spending holidays in Washington rather than returning to California, claiming that research deadlines or internship responsibilities prevented travel. The excuses were often genuine, but they also provided convenient cover for avoiding gatherings, where my life choices would inevitably become topics of uncomfortable discussion. My professional network began to fill the emotional space that family relationships had once occupied. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the senior fellow who supervised my research, became a mentor whose guidance extended far beyond academic matters. Elena had navigated her own path from a working-class family in Texas to influential positions in environmental policy, eventually serving as an advisor to 2 different presidential administrations. Her example showed me that it was possible to achieve both meaningful impact and financial security through public service, despite what my family believed about political careers. The other interns and junior researchers at the think tank formed a chosen family of sorts, bound together by shared commitment to policy work, and mutual understanding of the sacrifices involved in pursuing careers in public service. We spent long hours together analyzing data, debating policy implications, and supporting each other through the inevitable rejections and setbacks that came with competitive fellowship applications and job searches. These relationships provided the encouragement and validation that I was no longer receiving from my biological family. During the winter break of my final year in graduate school, I made the decision to remain in Washington rather than return to California for Christmas. The official reason was a research project with a tight deadline, but the truth was that I couldn't face another holiday gathering where my achievements would be politely dismissed, and my career prospects would be questioned by people who couldn't understand the value of the work I was doing. Instead, I spent Christmas Day volunteering at a soup kitchen with other students who had chosen public service over family obligations, finding more genuine connection with strangers than I had felt at family gatherings in years. The absence was noted, of course, and generated concerned phone calls from various family members who worried that I was becoming too isolated and academic for my own good. Grandmother Helen, now 84 and increasingly frail, left a voicemail that brought me to tears, with its mixture of love and disappointment. "Mija, Christmas isn't the same without you here. I know you think your work is important, but family should come first. We're not getting any younger, and these moments together are precious. Please don't let your education make you forget where you come from." Her message highlighted the impossible choice I felt forced to make between pursuing my dreams and maintaining family relationships. From my perspective, I wasn't choosing work over family as much as protecting myself from people who couldn't appreciate my authentic self. But from their viewpoint, I was becoming selfish and distant, prioritizing abstract political goals over concrete family obligations. Both interpretations contained elements of truth, making the situation feel intractable and deeply sad for everyone involved. As I completed my master's degree and began applying for positions in government and policy organizations, the gap between my professional trajectory and family expectations seemed to widen exponentially. My thesis on federal renewable energy policy received recognition from the academic community and led to job interviews with prestigious organizations in both Washington and California. The culmination of 2 years of intense study and research was opening doors to exactly the kind of meaningful career I had always envisioned. Yet when I attempted to share this excitement with my family, the responses followed predictable patterns of polite interest, followed by practical concerns about salary, job security, and geographical location. My mother worried about me staying in Washington so far from family support systems, while my father questioned whether government positions offered adequate retirement benefits and advancement opportunities. Even my siblings, now firmly established in their own conventional career paths, seemed unable to understand why I would choose policy work over more lucrative alternatives in the private sector. The interviews themselves provided stark contrasts to my family conversations about career prospects. Senior officials at the Environmental Protection Agency, legislative directors for influential senators, and executive directors of major environmental organizations spoke to me as a serious professional whose expertise could contribute to important policy initiatives. They discussed complex challenges facing renewable energy development, climate change adaptation strategies, and the political dynamics necessary to advance environmental legislation through Congress. These conversations energized and inspired me in ways that family interactions no longer could. For the first time in months, I felt valued for my authentic interests and abilities rather than criticized for failing to pursue more conventional paths. The possibility of working on issues I cared deeply about while building a financially sustainable career seemed within reach, despite my family's continued skepticism about public service as a viable profession. The job offer that would change everything came from an unexpected source during the spring of my final semester. Dr. Michael Chen, a former think tank colleague who had recently been appointed as a senior policy advisor to California's Governor Richardson, reached out about a newly created position focusing on renewable energy initiatives at the state level. The role would involve coordinating between various state agencies, working with legislative staff on energy bills, and representing California at national conferences on climate policy. The position offered everything I had hoped for in a first professional job: meaningful work on issues I cared about, competitive compensation that would finally satisfy my family's financial concerns, and the opportunity to return to California while building a career in environmental policy. Most importantly, it would allow me to contribute directly to policy decisions that could affect millions of Californians while positioning me for future advancement in state government. When Dr. Chen described the role during our phone interview, I could hardly contain my excitement about the possibility of working on renewable energy policy at such a high level so early in my career. The governor's office was implementing an ambitious clean energy agenda that would require extensive research, stakeholder coordination, and legislative analysis, exactly the kind of work I had been preparing for throughout graduate school. The salary was substantially higher than typical entry-level government positions, reflecting the specialized expertise required and the administration's commitment to recruiting top talent for environmental initiatives. The formal interview process took place over 2 days in Sacramento, involving meetings with senior staff from multiple state agencies, legislative liaisons, and representatives from environmental organizations that would be working closely with the governor's office on clean energy implementation. Each conversation reinforced my sense that this position was exactly the right fit for my skills and interests, while providing the kind of professional growth opportunities that could lead to significant influence in environmental policy at the state and potentially federal level. Dr. Chen introduced me to Governor Richardson briefly during my second day of interviews, a moment that felt surreal after years of studying political leadership from an academic distance. The governor spoke knowledgeably about renewable energy challenges facing California and asked thoughtful questions about my research on federal tax incentive programs. His engagement with policy details and genuine interest in my expertise made it clear that this administration valued substantive knowledge over political connections in their hiring decisions. The job offer arrived 2 weeks later, accompanied by a start date that would allow me to complete my thesis defense and graduate on schedule before beginning work in Sacramento. The compensation package exceeded my expectations and would finally allow me to achieve the financial independence that my family had always emphasized as crucial for adult success. More importantly, the position represented exactly the kind of meaningful public service career I had been working toward since my undergraduate days at Berkeley. When I called my parents to share the news about my job offer, I expected their response to be more enthusiastic than previous conversations about my career prospects. After all, this was a real job, with a real salary working for the governor of California, not another academic program or unpaid internship. The position carried prestige that even my family should be able to recognize and respect, while focusing on environmental issues that had clear importance for California's future. My mother's initial reaction was indeed more positive than I had experienced in years, with genuine congratulations on securing such a competitive position and relief that I would finally be earning a substantial income. My father asked practical questions about benefits and advancement opportunities that suggested he was taking my career choice seriously for the first time since I had declared my political science major. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope that this achievement might finally bridge the gap between my professional ambitions and family expectations. However, the conversation quickly returned to familiar patterns when my mother began expressing concerns about the political nature of the work and its potential instability. She worried that changes in administration could eliminate my position, questioned whether government work would provide adequate long-term security, and wondered aloud whether I might use this experience as a stepping stone to more stable employment in the private sector. Even Amanda, when she heard about the job offer, suggested that I should view it as an entry point to consulting work that could eventually lead to more lucrative opportunities with corporations rather than continued government service. Their inability to understand that I wanted a career in public service, not just any well-paying job, highlighted the fundamental disconnect that had been growing between us for years. To my family, work was primarily a means to financial security and social status, while to me, meaningful contribution to important issues was at least as important as compensation. The job offer that represented the fulfillment of my professional dreams was still viewed by my family as a temporary phase before I settled into something more conventional and practically minded. Despite their lukewarm enthusiasm, I accepted the position with excitement and gratitude for the opportunity to begin the kind of career I had always envisioned. Moving back to California felt like returning home with validation that my educational choices had been worthwhile, even if my family couldn't fully appreciate the significance of what I had accomplished. The transition from graduate student to senior policy advisor represented a major milestone in my professional development and personal independence, setting the stage for achievements that would eventually force even my skeptical family to reconsider their assumptions about political careers and public service. Working in the governor's office exceeded every expectation I had harbored about meaningful public service. The pace was relentless but exhilarating, with each day bringing new challenges that required the kind of analytical thinking and policy expertise I had been developing throughout my academic career. My office, located in the historic Capitol building with its soaring dome and marble corridors, felt like the epicenter of important decisions that would affect millions of Californians for decades to come. The renewable energy portfolio I managed encompassed everything from solar panel installation incentives for residential properties to massive wind farm projects that could power entire counties. Governor Richardson had made environmental policy a cornerstone of his administration, and my role involved coordinating between multiple state agencies, private sector stakeholders, and federal partners to implement the most ambitious clean energy agenda in California's history. The work demanded 16-hour days during legislative sessions, but I thrived on the complexity and the knowledge that our policy decisions could accelerate the transition to sustainable energy across the nation's largest state. My colleagues in the governor's office represented the kind of dedicated public servants I had always admired from afar during my academic studies. Deputy Chief of Staff Maria Santos had previously worked for 3 different governors and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of California politics that made her an invaluable mentor. Policy Director James Wright had left a lucrative consulting career to focus on education reform, bringing private sector efficiency to government operations without sacrificing the public interest focus that distinguished government service from corporate work. The professional relationships I developed during my first year in state government provided both intellectual stimulation and personal support that had been missing from my life since graduate school. We worked as a team on complex initiatives that required expertise from multiple disciplines, creating bonds forged through shared commitment to public service and mutual respect for each other's specialized knowledge. When we successfully shepherded major environmental legislation through the state assembly, the celebration felt more meaningful than any personal achievement I had experienced, because it represented collective effort toward genuinely important goals. My family's response to my new career remained frustratingly consistent with their previous reactions to my academic and professional achievements. While they acknowledged that working for the governor carried more prestige than they had initially expected, their conversations still focused primarily on practical concerns about job security and advancement opportunities, rather than the substantive policy work that energized me daily. My mother worried about the long hours and high-pressure environment, while my father questioned whether government salaries could ever provide the kind of financial security that private sector employment offered. During my first Christmas break after starting the job, I returned to Riverside for what would prove to be my final attempt at maintaining traditional family relationships. The gathering at Grandmother Helen's house followed familiar patterns, with Amanda dominating conversations about her recent promotion to partner at her accounting firm, and Kevin entertaining everyone with stories about his newlywed life with Sarah and their recent home purchase in a trendy Orange County neighborhood. Their achievements were celebrated with genuine enthusiasm and detailed questions that demonstrated the family's engagement with their conventional success stories. When conversation turned to my work, I found myself once again struggling to translate meaningful policy accomplishments into terms my family could understand or appreciate. My excitement about legislation that would create thousands of clean energy jobs across California was met with polite interest, followed immediately by questions about whether such work might lead to opportunities in the private sector. My pride in representing California at national conferences on renewable energy policy was acknowledged briefly before Aunt Carol wondered aloud when I would start focusing on personal relationships instead of spending all my time traveling for work. The evening reached its emotional nadir when Grandmother Helen, now 85 and increasingly concerned about my unmarried status, pulled me aside for what she clearly intended as a caring but necessary conversation about my priorities. "Mija, I'm proud that you have such an important job, but I worry that you're missing out on the things that really matter in life. Your cousins are all married now, some with children, building families and putting down roots. You're 30 years old. And while this political work seems important to you, what about your future? When will you find a good man and start thinking about children before it's too late?" Her words, delivered with genuine love but devastating impact, crystallized the fundamental disconnect that had been growing between my values and my family's expectations for over a decade. Despite achieving exactly the kind of meaningful career I had always dreamed about, despite earning more money than most of my cousins, despite working at the highest levels of state government on issues that affected millions of people, I was still viewed primarily through the lens of what I hadn't accomplished, according to traditional markers of female success. The conversation that followed would forever alter my relationship with my family, though I didn't fully grasp its significance at the time. I attempted once more to explain the importance of the work I was doing, describing how renewable energy policies could create economic opportunities for working-class families, while addressing climate change that threatened California's agricultural economy and coastal communities. I spoke about the satisfaction of contributing to solutions for problems that affected real people's lives and the honor of serving the public good through government work. Grandmother Helen listened with the patience she had always shown when I discussed my career, but her response revealed that no amount of explanation would bridge the gap between her worldview and mine. "I understand that you think this work is important, Jessica, but government jobs come and go with elections. What happens when there is a new governor who doesn't share these environmental priorities? You'll be left with nothing but years spent on other people's problems instead of building your own life. You're a smart, beautiful woman who could have any life you wanted, but you're choosing to sacrifice your personal happiness for abstract political goals that may not even matter in a few years." Her assessment stung because it revealed how completely my family misunderstood both my motivations and my achievements. To them, my commitment to public service was a form of self-sacrifice that prevented me from pursuing more important goals like marriage and motherhood. They couldn't see that I found my work deeply fulfilling, or that I had built a life in Sacramento filled with meaningful relationships and professional satisfaction. In their narrative, I remained the family member who had chosen an unconventional path that required explanation and gentle correction, rather than celebration and support. The breaking point came when Aunt Carol joined our conversation, bringing with her the kind of direct criticism that had characterized her interactions with me since childhood. "Jessica, honey, we all admire your dedication to these causes. But don't you think it's time to be realistic about what you want from life? You could use your education and experience to get a good job in the private sector, something stable that would allow you to focus on finding a husband and starting a family. This government work is fine for now, but it's not a sustainable long-term plan for a woman who wants a complete life." The implication that my life was incomplete because it didn't include marriage and children, despite my professional accomplishments and personal satisfaction, triggered a response that surprised me with its intensity. For the first time in my adult life, I found myself defending not just my career choices but my right to define success and fulfillment on my own terms. The conversation that followed was both cathartic and devastating, marking the end of my attempts to maintain relationships with family members who couldn't accept my authentic self. I explained that my work wasn't a sacrifice but a choice that brought me genuine satisfaction and allowed me to contribute to important solutions for environmental challenges. I described the relationships I had built with colleagues who shared my values and supported my ambitions, without requiring me to justify my life choices. Most importantly, I made it clear that I wouldn't continue subjecting myself to conversations that treated my achievements as problems to be solved, rather than accomplishments to be celebrated. The family's response was immediate and predictably negative. Several relatives accused me of becoming arrogant and ungrateful, suggesting that my government job had given me an inflated sense of importance that was making me difficult to be around. Others expressed concern that I was becoming too independent and career-focused for my own good, losing sight of the things that really mattered in life. Even my parents, who had remained relatively neutral during previous conflicts, seemed to side with the consensus that I needed attitude adjustment rather than family understanding. That Christmas gathering became my last attempt at maintaining traditional family relationships on their terms. Over the following months, I gradually withdrew from family events and limited contact to brief, superficial phone calls that avoided controversial topics about career and lifestyle choices. The emotional distance that developed felt both protective and sad, representing the loss of relationships that had once been central to my identity, while also freeing me from constant criticism and pressure to conform to expectations I couldn't meet without betraying my authentic self. My career continued to flourish during this period of family estrangement, with my renewable energy expertise earning recognition at both state and national levels. Governor Richardson appointed me to lead a multi-agency task force on clean energy infrastructure that required coordination with federal officials and private sector partners across multiple states. The work was complex and high-profile, involving testimony before legislative committees and representation of California's interests at national conferences where renewable energy policy was being debated and shaped. The professional recognition I received during this period provided validation that had been missing from my family relationships for years. Environmental organizations invited me to speak at conferences about policy implementation strategies. Academic institutions sought my input on research projects examining the economic impacts of renewable energy initiatives. Media outlets quoted my analysis of legislative developments in articles about California's leadership role in environmental policy. For the first time since college, I felt valued for my expertise and appreciated for my contributions to important work. My personal life also began to reflect the confidence and independence I had developed through professional success and family boundary setting. I purchased a townhouse in a charming Sacramento neighborhood within walking distance of the Capitol building, creating a living space that reflected my values and interests rather than anyone else's expectations. The home became a gathering place for friends and colleagues who appreciated good wine, interesting conversation, and the kind of intellectual engagement that had been missing from family dinners for years. It was during this period of professional growth and personal independence that I met Daniel Rodriguez, an environmental lawyer who had been hired by the governor's office to handle legal challenges to our renewable energy initiatives. Daniel possessed the rare combination of brilliant legal mind and genuine commitment to environmental protection that made him both a valuable colleague and an interesting person to spend time with outside of work. Our relationship developed gradually, from professional collaboration to personal friendship to something deeper that neither of us had been actively seeking but both welcomed when it emerged. Daniel understood my passion for policy work in ways that my family never had, bringing his own expertise in environmental law to conversations about regulatory strategies and legislative priorities. He had made similar choices about prioritizing meaningful work over maximum income, leaving a lucrative position at a corporate law firm to focus on environmental advocacy through government service. Our shared values and complementary skills created the kind of partnership I had always hoped to find, but had begun to doubt was possible given my family's consistent message that career dedication and personal relationships were mutually exclusive. As my third year in the governor's office began, I received an invitation that would vindicate every choice I had made since declaring my political science major at Berkeley. The National Association of Environmental Policy Officials had selected me to receive their Outstanding Young Professional Award, recognizing my contributions to renewable energy policy development and implementation at the state level. The award ceremony would take place at their annual conference in Washington, with recipients delivering keynote addresses about their work to an audience of senior officials from across the country. Preparing for that speech required me to reflect on the journey that had brought me from a family dinner table where my interests were dismissed as impractical, to a national platform where my expertise was being celebrated by peers and senior officials alike. The recognition felt especially meaningful because it came from professionals who understood the complexities and importance of policy work, validating choices that my family had questioned for over a decade. The speech itself focused on California's renewable energy initiatives and their potential for replication in other states, but the subtext was deeply personal for me. Standing at that podium, addressing an audience of accomplished public servants who shared my commitment to environmental protection, I felt the satisfaction of pursuing authentic interests, despite family pressure to choose more conventional paths. The sustained applause and thoughtful questions that followed confirmed that I had found my professional home among people who valued the same kinds of contributions I was passionate about making. When I returned to California after the conference, Governor Richardson called me into his office for a conversation that would open the next chapter of my career in public service. He had been following my work on renewable energy policy and had received feedback about my conference presentation from colleagues in other states who were impressed by California's progress on clean energy implementation. The governor's environmental agenda was expanding to include climate adaptation strategies and carbon reduction initiatives that would require even more sophisticated policy coordination and stakeholder engagement. He offered me a promotion to Senior Policy Advisor for Environmental Initiatives, a position that would involve direct reporting to the governor and leadership of a team focusing on climate policy development and implementation. The role would require extensive travel to represent California's interests at national and international climate conferences, coordination with federal agencies on environmental regulation, and oversight of initiatives involving billions of dollars in state investment in renewable energy infrastructure. The promotion represented recognition of my expertise and contribution to the administration's environmental priorities, but it also carried responsibilities that would position me for future opportunities at the federal level or in private sector environmental consulting. Governor Richardson spoke about my potential for significant influence in national environmental policy and suggested that the skills I was developing in state government could eventually lead to appointments in future federal administrations or leadership positions in major environmental organizations. As I accepted the promotion and began transitioning into my expanded responsibilities, I realized that I had achieved exactly the kind of meaningful career I had envisioned during those lonely evenings in Riverside, when I felt like the only person in my family who cared about government and policy. The work was challenging and important, my colleagues respected my contributions, and my expertise was valued by officials at the highest levels of state government. Most importantly, I had built a life that reflected my authentic interests and values, rather than other people's expectations about what would make me happy. The invitation that would bring my family story full circle arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning in March, delivered by courier to my office in the Capitol building. The heavy envelope bore the official seal of the Governor of California. But this wasn't routine correspondence about policy matters. Inside, printed on elegant cardstock with gold embossing, was a formal invitation to an exclusive dinner at the governor's mansion, honoring recipients of Distinguished Service Awards and their contributions to California's environmental leadership. The invitation specified that the evening would include a presentation ceremony recognizing my Outstanding Young Professional Award and my role in developing renewable energy policies that had become models for other states. Governor Richardson would be presenting me with California's Environmental Excellence Award, the state's highest recognition for contributions to environmental protection and sustainable development. The guest list would include senior officials from multiple state agencies, environmental organization leaders, and federal representatives who were collaborating with California on climate initiatives. As I held that invitation, the irony wasn't lost on me that I would be honored at the governor's mansion just days before Easter, almost exactly 10 years after the family dinner, where my career choice had been dismissed as impractical and self-indulgent. The timing felt like cosmic justice, providing the perfect opportunity to demonstrate how wrong my family's assumptions about political careers had been. But more than vindication, the invitation represented validation of choices I had made despite family pressure, proof that following authentic interests could lead to exactly the kind of meaningful success I had always hoped to achieve. I decided to attend my family's Easter gathering that year for the first time in several years, carrying the governor's mansion invitation in my purse like a talisman against the criticism and condescension I expected to encounter. The drive down to Riverside felt different this time, not like a retreat from my real life, but like a diplomatic mission to people who had never understood my world, but might finally be forced to acknowledge its legitimacy. The gathering at Grandmother Helen's house followed predictable patterns initially, with family members updating each other on conventional milestones and achievements that earned immediate understanding and approval. Amanda had been promoted to senior partner at her firm and was considering running for the local school board, a development that generated enthusiastic discussion about community involvement and leadership opportunities. Kevin and Sarah had recently purchased a larger home in anticipation of starting a family, prompting excited conversations about nursery decorating and baby preparations. When conversation turned to me, I found myself responding to familiar questions about my work with a confidence that hadn't been present during previous family interactions. Instead of defensively explaining why policy work was important, I simply described my recent promotion and the expanded responsibilities that came with leading the governor's environmental initiatives. Rather than translating my achievements into terms I thought my family might understand, I spoke about my work with the same assumption of interest and respect that other family members received when discussing their careers. The shift in dynamic was immediately apparent. My family members asked more thoughtful questions about my responsibilities and seemed genuinely curious about the scope of California's environmental policies and their potential impact. For the first time in years, I felt like they were taking my career seriously, rather than treating it as an extended academic exercise that would eventually be abandoned for more practical pursuits. The conversation reached its turning point when Aunt Carol asked about my long-term career plans and whether I was considering opportunities in the private sector that might offer better financial prospects. Instead of the defensive response I might have given in previous years, I calmly explained that I was quite satisfied with my current trajectory and had actually been approached by several environmental consulting firms and nonprofit organizations about leadership positions that I had declined in favor of continuing my government service. Then, with the timing of a perfectly executed political maneuver, I mentioned that I would be unable to stay for Easter dinner because I had a prior commitment that evening. When pressed for details, I casually withdrew the governor's mansion invitation from my purse and explained that I was receiving a State Environmental Excellence Award at an exclusive ceremony honoring distinguished contributions to California's climate leadership. The effect on my family was immediate and profound, with expressions ranging from surprise to admiration to what looked distinctly like respect. Grandmother Helen, now 88 but still sharp, asked to examine the invitation closely, reading every word with the careful attention she had always given to important documents. When she handed it back to me, her eyes held a different expression than I had seen during previous conversations about my career. "Mija," she said quietly, "I think I may have misunderstood what you've been building all these years. This is a great honor, and I'm proud of you for earning it." The acknowledgement from the family matriarch seemed to give permission for other relatives to express similar sentiments. Aunt Carol admitted that she hadn't fully grasped the significance of my policy work, or its potential for career advancement. My parents spoke with genuine pride about my achievements, and asked thoughtful questions about the governor's environmental agenda and my role in shaping it. Even my siblings seemed to view my career with new respect, asking about opportunities for their own potential involvement in environmental initiatives through their professional networks. As I prepared to leave for the governor's mansion that evening, surrounded by family members who were finally seeing my work through a lens of respect rather than concern, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. The validation I had wanted for over a decade was finally being offered, but it had required an external authority figure to legitimize my choices before my own family could acknowledge their value. The recognition felt both satisfying and hollow, representing both a personal victory and a reminder of how conditional family support had always been. The evening at the governor's mansion exceeded even my elevated expectations, with the formal ceremony taking place in the elegant dining room where California's most important policy decisions had been discussed and debated for over a century. Governor Richardson's presentation speech highlighted my contributions to renewable energy policy development and my role in positioning California as a national leader in environmental protection. The audience of senior officials and environmental leaders represented the professional community that had nurtured and celebrated my growth in ways that my family never had. During the reception that followed the ceremony, I found myself in conversations with federal officials who spoke about potential opportunities in Washington should I ever be interested in returning to the nation's capital. Environmental organization leaders discussed leadership positions that would allow me to influence national policy on climate change and sustainable development. The evening represented not just recognition of past achievements, but an opening to future opportunities that could expand my influence on the environmental issues I cared most deeply about. As I drove home that night, the State Environmental Excellence Award resting on my passenger seat and my phone filled with congratulatory messages from colleagues and mentors, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from family disapproval to state recognition. The path had been lonely at times, requiring me to choose authentic interests over family expectations and meaningful work over conventional measures of success. But sitting in my car outside my Sacramento townhouse, surrounded by the life I had built through choices my family had questioned for years, I felt profound satisfaction with the direction my decisions had taken me. The relationship with my family evolved significantly after that Easter evening, though it never fully recovered the closeness of my childhood years. We developed a new dynamic based on mutual respect rather than familial obligation, with my relatives finally acknowledging that my career path had led to exactly the kind of recognition and influence they had always valued but hadn't understood was possible through public service. The conversations became more substantive and less critical, focusing on my actual work rather than concerns about my life choices. Daniel and I married 2 years later in a small ceremony at my Sacramento townhouse, surrounded by colleagues and friends who had supported our relationship and celebrated our shared commitment to environmental protection through public service. My family attended and seemed genuinely happy for me, though their pleasure appeared to stem more from relief that I had finally achieved a conventional milestone than from understanding that I had found a partner who shared my values and appreciated my authentic self. My career continued to flourish in the years following the governor's mansion recognition, with opportunities for national influence on environmental policy that validated every choice I had made since declaring my political science major at Berkeley. I eventually accepted a position with the Federal Environmental Protection Agency during a new administration that prioritized climate action, bringing my expertise in renewable energy policy to national initiatives that could affect environmental protection across all 50 states. Looking back on the journey from family black sheep to state recognition and beyond, I understand that the pain of family disapproval was necessary for developing the independence and resilience required for meaningful public service. The years of defending my choices and pursuing my interests without family support taught me to find validation from the work itself and from colleagues who shared my commitment to environmental protection. While I wish my family had been able to appreciate my path from the beginning, their eventual recognition felt more meaningful because it was based on objective achievements rather than unconditional familial love. The invitation to dine at the governor's mansion represented more than personal vindication. It symbolized the possibility of choosing authentic interests over external expectations and finding success through commitment to meaningful work rather than conventional measures of achievement. For anyone facing family pressure to abandon dreams that seem impractical or unconventional, my story offers evidence that following genuine passions with persistence and dedication can lead to recognition and influence that exceeds even ambitious expectations. The black sheep of the family sometimes becomes the one who changes the world, but only by remaining true to their authentic self despite pressure to conform to other people's limitations. The morning of Easter Sunday dawned crisp and clear across Riverside, California, the kind of perfect spring day that made the valley seem almost idyllic, despite its suburban sprawl and endless strip malls. I stood in my hotel room at the Marriott downtown, adjusting the cream silk blouse I had chosen for what I knew would be a pivotal family gathering. The governor's mansion invitation rested prominently on the dresser beside me, its elegant calligraphy and official seal catching the morning light like a tangible reminder of how far I had traveled from the uncertain graduate student who had last attempted to defend her career choices at a family dinner. The drive to Grandmother Helen's house took me through neighborhoods I had known since childhood, past the elementary school, where I had first discovered my love for reading about government and politics, past the high school where guidance counselors had encouraged me to consider more practical career paths than political science. Every familiar landmark felt like a checkpoint on a journey that had begun with naive hope and evolved through years of struggle into hard-won success. The woman driving this rental car bore little resemblance to the defensive young graduate student who had left this same Easter gathering 8 years earlier, wounded by family criticism and determined to prove them wrong through sheer force of will. Grandmother Helen's ranch-style house looked smaller than I remembered, its carefully maintained rose garden and immaculate lawn reflecting the same attention to appearances that had characterized our family gatherings throughout my childhood. Cars already filled the driveway and lined the street, indicating that most of the extended family had arrived for what had become their annual ritual of catching up on achievements, sharing concerns, and reinforcing the collective values that had shaped 3 generations of Martinez family decisions. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, gathering the emotional composure I would need for conversations that had become increasingly difficult over the years. The last time I had attended one of these gatherings, my renewable energy policy work had been dismissed as idealistic hobby that prevented me from focusing on more important priorities like marriage and homeownership. Today, I carried evidence that those same policy initiatives had earned recognition from the highest levels of California government and positioned me as a leader in environmental protection efforts that could influence national climate strategies. The front door opened before I could knock, revealing my cousin Samantha with her characteristic warm smile and immediate embrace. "Jessica! We're so glad you could make it this year. Grandmother Helen has been asking about you all morning, and everyone's excited to hear about your work with the governor." Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, lacking the undertone of polite concern that had characterized previous family interactions about my career. Something in the family dynamic had shifted during my absence, though I couldn't yet identify what had changed or why. The living room buzzed with familiar voices and laughter, the sound of family members catching up on months of news and sharing updates about jobs, relationships, and children. Amanda stood near the fireplace, her designer dress and perfectly styled hair reflecting the success she had achieved in her accounting career and the financial security it provided. She was describing her latest client acquisition to Aunt Carol and Uncle Stephen, who listened with the kind of engaged attention that professional accomplishments always received in our family circles. Kevin sat on the couch beside his wife Sarah, bouncing their 6-month-old daughter on his knee while regaling our parents with stories about their recent home renovation and his promotion to assistant manager at the electronics store. The baby's presence had added a new dimension to family gatherings, with conversations now including discussions of childcare strategies, educational planning, and the joys and challenges of parenthood that Kevin and Sarah navigated with apparent ease. When I entered the room, conversations paused momentarily as family members turned to greet me with expressions that seemed different from previous encounters. Instead of the polite smiles masking concern about my life choices, I saw genuine curiosity and what appeared to be respect. My father rose from his chair to embrace me warmly, asking about my flight from Sacramento and whether I was settling well into my new position as senior policy advisor. Even Aunt Carol approached with a hug and immediate questions about my work that suggested actual interest rather than obligation. The shift in family dynamics became more apparent as we moved to the dining room for dinner, with Grandmother Helen's table set with her finest china and crystal in honor of Easter tradition. I found myself seated between my parents rather than relegated to the periphery where my unconventional career had often placed me during previous gatherings. The conversation flowed naturally around topics of work and achievement, but this time my contributions were met with thoughtful questions and genuine engagement rather than polite dismissal, followed by quick subject changes. Amanda asked specific questions about renewable energy policy implementation, wondering how state initiatives might affect her clients in the construction and development industries. Kevin expressed interest in potential job opportunities that environmental programs might create for people with his technical background. Even Uncle Stephen, who had always seemed skeptical of government work, inquired about the economic impacts of clean energy investments and whether such policies were attracting businesses to California rather than driving them away. The transformation in family attitudes became most evident when Aunt Carol, who had spent years questioning my career choices and suggesting alternative paths, began describing my work to family members who hadn't seen me in several years. She spoke knowledgeably about renewable energy policy and its importance for California's future, using terminology that suggested she had been researching environmental issues and following news coverage of the governor's initiatives. Her descriptions carried none of the condescension that had characterized her previous comments about my political work. When I asked what had prompted this change in perspective, the answer revealed how significantly my family's understanding of my career had evolved during my absence from their gatherings. Amanda explained that my mother had been following news coverage of the governor's environmental policies and had begun mentioning my role in policy development to neighbors and friends. Mom saw your name quoted in several newspaper articles about renewable energy legislation, and she started realizing that your work was getting attention beyond what we had understood, Amanda said. Then last month she found a magazine interview where you were identified as one of California's rising stars in environmental policy. My mother, looking slightly embarrassed but clearly proud, confirmed that she had been saving newspaper clippings and magazine articles that mentioned my work or quoted my analysis of environmental issues. I started reading more about what you actually do, Mija, and I began to understand that your job isn't just about politics, but about creating programs that help families save money on electricity and create jobs for people in our community. I showed the articles to your father, and we both realized we hadn't been seeing the bigger picture of what you were accomplishing. The revelation that my family had been independently researching my field and discovering the significance of renewable energy policy felt more meaningful than any direct explanation I could have provided. Their understanding had developed organically through exposure to media coverage and policy analysis, rather than through my attempts to educate them about environmental issues. The transformation felt authentic because it was based on their own investigation rather than my defensive presentations about why my work mattered. As dinner progressed, I found myself relaxing into conversations that felt fundamentally different from previous family interactions. Instead of defending my choices or translating my achievements into terms my family might understand, I could discuss my work with the same assumption of interest and respect that other family members received when sharing their professional updates. The change wasn't dramatic enough to erase years of tension, but it represented a significant step toward the kind of family relationships I had always hoped were possible. The conversation reached a crucial moment when Grandmother Helen, now showing her 88 years but still commanding attention when she spoke, addressed me directly about my career and life choices. "Jessica, I owe you an apology for not understanding what you were building all these years. I thought you were choosing uncertainty over security, but I see now that you were choosing meaningful work over easy money. Your grandfather would have been proud of what you've accomplished, even if it took me longer to appreciate it." Her acknowledgement carried particular weight because Grandmother Helen had been the most vocal critic of my career path, consistently expressing concern that I was sacrificing practical security for abstract political goals. Her change of heart seemed to give permission for other family members to express similar recognition of my achievements and appreciation for the path I had chosen despite their previous skepticism. The transformation in family dynamics was reinforced throughout the afternoon as relatives asked substantive questions about environmental policy and seemed genuinely interested in learning about renewable energy initiatives and their potential impacts. Uncle Stephen, who managed auto parts stores, wondered about electric vehicle infrastructure and how it might affect his business planning. Cousin Brittany, now working as a dental office manager, asked about air quality improvements and their potential health benefits for her patients. These conversations revealed that my family's evolution in understanding my career wasn't limited to acknowledging its legitimacy, but extended to recognizing its relevance to their own lives and interests. They were beginning to see connections between environmental policy and their daily experiences as California residents who paid electricity bills, breathed air affected by pollution, and worked in industries that could benefit from clean energy investments. As the afternoon wore on, I realized that my family's changed perspective had created space for more authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than tolerance for my unconventional choices. The conversations flowed naturally between topics without the undercurrent of judgment that had characterized previous gatherings. I found myself enjoying their company in ways that had been impossible, when every discussion about my work required defensive explanations or careful translation into terms they might accept. The pivotal moment of the gathering came when my mother asked about my plans for the evening, noting that I seemed dressed more formally than usual for a family dinner. The question provided the perfect opening for what I had been anticipating all day: the opportunity to share news about the Governor's Mansion invitation and the Environmental Excellence Award that would be presented that evening. I reached into my purse and withdrew the elegant invitation, its heavy paper and gold embossing immediately commanding attention from everyone at the table. As I explained that I would be leaving early to attend an exclusive ceremony at the Governor's Mansion, where I would receive California's highest environmental recognition, the room fell silent with a mixture of surprise and unmistakable pride. Grandmother Helen asked to examine the invitation closely, reading every word with the careful attention she had always given to important documents. When she handed it back to me, her expression reflected not just pride, but a kind of wonder at how far my career had progressed beyond what any of us had imagined possible when I first announced my intention to study political science. "Misha, this is extraordinary. To think that my granddaughter will be dining with the governor and receiving such recognition for her work." The impact of the invitation on my family was immediate and profound. Suddenly, the career they had viewed with concern for nearly a decade was revealed to have led to exactly the kind of recognition and achievement they had always valued but hadn't understood was possible through public service. The validation wasn't coming from me trying to explain my work's importance, but from an external authority figure whose recognition they couldn't question or dismiss. Amanda asked thoughtful questions about the selection process for the award and what it might mean for my future career opportunities. Kevin wanted to know if the ceremony would be covered by news media and whether our family would be able to see photos or video of the event. Even Aunt Carol, who had spent years suggesting I should pursue more practical career paths, spoke with obvious pride about having a niece who would be honored at the Governor's Mansion. The conversation that followed revealed how completely my family's perception of my career had transformed. They spoke about my work with the same respect and enthusiasm they had always shown for Amanda's business achievements and Kevin's conventional success milestones. More importantly, they seemed to understand for the first time that I had achieved exactly what I had set out to accomplish when I first expressed interest in government and policy work. As I prepared to leave for the Governor's Mansion, My family gathered around me with expressions of pride and support that had been absent during my previous attempts to share professional achievements. My mother hugged me tightly and whispered that she was sorry for not understanding sooner how important and successful my work had become. My father shook my hand formally and said he was proud to have a daughter who was making such significant contributions to California's future. My office, located in the historic Capitol building with its soaring dome and marble corridors, felt like the epicenter of important decisions that would affect millions of Californians for decades to come. The renewable energy portfolio I managed encompassed everything from solar panel installation incentives for residential properties to massive wind farm projects that could power entire counties. Governor Richardson had made environmental policy a cornerstone of his administration, and my role involved coordinating between multiple state agencies, private sector stakeholders, and federal partners to implement the most ambitious clean energy agenda in California's history. The work demanded 16-hour days during legislative sessions, but I thrived on the complexity and the knowledge that our policy decisions could accelerate the transition to sustainable energy across the nation's largest state. My colleagues in the governor's office represented the kind of dedicated public servants I had always admired from afar during my academic studies. Deputy Chief of Staff Maria Santos had previously worked for 3 different governors and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of California politics that made her an invaluable mentor. Policy Director James Wright had left a lucrative consulting career to focus on education reform, bringing private sector efficiency to government operations without sacrificing the public interest focus that distinguished government service from corporate work. The professional relationships I developed during my first year in state government provided both intellectual stimulation and personal support that had been missing from my life since graduate school. We worked as a team on complex initiatives that required expertise from multiple disciplines, creating bonds forged through shared commitment to public service and mutual respect for each other's specialized knowledge. When we successfully shepherded major environmental legislation through the state assembly, the celebration felt more meaningful than any personal achievement I had experienced, because it represented collective effort toward genuinely important goals. My family's response to my new career remained frustratingly consistent with their previous reactions to my academic and professional achievements. While they acknowledged that working for the governor carried more prestige than they had initially expected, their conversations still focused primarily on practical concerns about job security and advancement opportunities, rather than the substantive policy work that energized me daily. My mother worried about the long hours and high-pressure environment, while my father questioned whether government salaries could ever provide the kind of financial security that private sector employment offered. During my first Christmas break after starting the job, I returned to Riverside for what would prove to be my final attempt at maintaining traditional family relationships. The gathering at Grandmother Helen's house followed familiar patterns, with Amanda dominating conversations about her recent promotion to partner at her accounting firm, and Kevin entertaining everyone with stories about his newlywed life with Sarah and their recent home purchase in a trendy Orange County neighborhood. Their achievements were celebrated with genuine enthusiasm and detailed questions that demonstrated the family's engagement with their conventional success stories. When conversation turned to my work, I found myself once again struggling to translate meaningful policy accomplishments into terms my family could understand or appreciate. My excitement about legislation that would create thousands of clean energy jobs across California was met with polite interest, followed immediately by questions about whether such work might lead to opportunities in the private sector. My pride in representing California at national conferences on renewable energy policy was acknowledged briefly before Aunt Carol wondered aloud when I would start focusing on personal relationships instead of spending all my time traveling for work. The evening reached its emotional nadir when Grandmother Helen, now 85 and increasingly concerned about my unmarried status, pulled me aside for what she clearly intended as a caring but necessary conversation about my priorities. "Mija, I'm proud that you have such an important job, but I worry that you're missing out on the things that really matter in life. Your cousins are all married now, some with children, building families and putting down roots. You're 30 years old. And while this political work seems important to you, what about your future?" The years of defending my choices taught me to find validation from the work itself, and from colleagues who shared my commitment to environmental protection. rather than from people who couldn't appreciate the value of what I was trying to accomplish. The invitation to dine at the governor's mansion represented more than personal vindication. It symbolized the possibility of following authentic interests despite external pressure and finding success through commitment to meaningful work rather than conventional measures of achievement. For anyone facing family criticism for pursuing dreams that seem impractical or unconventional, my story demonstrates that persistence and dedication to genuine passions can lead to recognition and influence that exceeds even ambitious expectations. The black sheep of the family sometimes becomes the one who changes the world, but only by remaining true to their authentic self, despite pressure to conform to other people's limitations. The Easter dinner that had once felt like a trial became a celebration of choices that had led me exactly where I belonged, serving the public good through work that mattered, surrounded by people who valued my contributions, and finally earning the respect of family members who had learned to see beyond their own narrow definitions of success. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.